move. Let it move right now because we got to work some. We have a lot of shit to work out. I have a lot of shit to work out, so I invite you to move. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Before we jump in, I want to introduce Daniel, who's with Shutdown DC, who's helping me with technical stuff tonight. And he just wanted to do a little opening stuff around tech things and as we're still gathering. So, Daniel, let me pass it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Lisa. So, like I said, I'm Daniel. I'm with Shutdown DC. We are organizing a powerful mobilization this fall, and we're excited to see everyone plugging in here. I'm here for any tech support. I know many of you have been on a lot of Zoom calls in the past 6 months, but there are always things that pop up that we don't expect. And so if you at any point you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to DM me. You can direct message me, and I will happily try and talk to you and see what we can do to figure it out. We are recording this. If you don't want your face to be recorded or you want to do a different name, please feel free to change your name. You can rename yourself by hovering over your video icon with your mouse, clicking the 3 dots, then go to rename or turn off your video. But we are recording this so we can share this wonderful knowledge with even more people. And then lastly, we've been getting some attention from some fun right-wing folks ranging from Fox News to Breitbart. If anyone is disruptive at any point, please feel free to let me know, and we'll promptly remove them. If we do have a Zoom bombing, just hold on for a few minutes. We'll get people out and then restart once we have grounded ourselves again. So we know it's a possibility, and we're prepared for it. Otherwise, Lisa, I'm going to turn it right back to you.
Cool. Thank you so much. Let me close this up. Okay. Hi, everyone. I feel like I've been my extended family, and you know, I always come into trainings really stressed because it's just it can be overwhelming. But it's really I'm so grateful that we're doing this as a meeting and not a webinar because I get to see some of your faces, and there's way too many screens to see everybody. But I just have to say that in times like now, it's like we need each other more than ever. So I'm grateful that we've come together tonight as a community to start anchoring ourselves even more into what may be, because we are in a time of uncertainty. And so before I go much more deeply into introduction or what we're going to do tonight, I actually do want to, we're going to split you up to do a little intro yourself. Because one of the things you'll see that I've been learning is the importance of that human connection and the somatic work that's critical, that we are not in a space with over, how many people are here? 200 people. But we might have like 4 or 5 or 6 to connect with more quickly before we go deeper. And when you're in that introductory space, You can share your name, where you are, your pronouns, the land you're on if you know it. But what I really want you to spend a few minutes exploring is what makes you feel free? What is freedom? When you feel free, what makes you feel that way? Is it people, a place? So, Daniel, if you want to just quickly split people up into groups, we're not going to spend a lot of time here. Daniel, about how many people you think we'll have in groups? We're going to aim for like 5 or 6, 7 in a group.
Yeah, so we're gonna have about 5 to 6 people in each group.
Great.
Yeah, those are ready to go, Lisa, whenever you're ready.
And they'll all get a little screen that says join a group, join that, get to know some new people if you don't know them. Let's explore what it means to be free.
Yeah.
Go.
So, all of you should be seeing popping up on your screen a invitation to a breakout room. Go ahead and join that breakout rooms.
And Daniel, you can let me know when you think we're all ready.
Think we're ready to go?
Cool.
Everyone's back.
Great, thank you. So again, good evening and welcome everyone, especially those that have just joined. I don't know how it was for some of you to talk about, try and access.
No.
You felt made you feel free. If you share anything about that, you can put it in the chat. But one of the things that I've noticed is that when I'm feeling most free, I'm feeling most alive. And it's usually when I'm around either nature or people and we're doing things and that connection. And I've been trying to remind myself a lot about that lately because I feel like everything that we value and care about is at risk. And, you know, I also feel like it is so easy for us to be criminalized in this world and seen as the ones that are wrong. When in fact we're facing an administration and a potential coup and a potential insurrection where efforts to criminalize this are going to be even greater. And in the elders' wisdom from standing up, the Lakota Nation reminds us that we aren't just protesters. We're not just out there to protest what's happening. We're protectors of what we love. And we love life, and we love each other, and we love this planet. And I would go far to say that we love democracy, right? And we know that what we had is not what we want. We don't want to go back. We want to go forward. So one of the things I want to just offer right now is that is again understanding that everything that we're doing now in this moment is laying the groundwork for what is going to come. And it's funny, I find myself, I wonder if you do too, sometimes totally frenetic, questioning, like, is there going to be a war? Are people going to get killed? Like, is that on anybody else's mind? I'm guessing it is. I'm guessing that there is a collective unity right now about these things. And so, in tonight, what I'd like to do is spend some time, and we may not be here 3 hours. This may happen faster. But my goals for tonight are to really help each of us get grounded personally and prepared personally for what's ahead and the choices we have to make. To take some time to think strategically about what it is we're doing and how we might have impact. To spend a little time just even organizationally, how we can best be organized for this period. And then we're going to hone in a little bit more specifically about, some of the stuff that Shutdown DC is doing, some of the ways we're thinking about this that could be replicated in cities across the country. We've been working on a target map and a framework for scenarios. So we want to end up a little bit more forward thinking about ideas of what we might do. Because what we do know is that the way I think about this is that, I think about Civil War and the rise of fascism. When I think about Germany and what happened with the Nazis, there's a very distinct landmass in which this was unfolding. And when there was a civil war in this country, there was a massive landmass that was divided. But we don't have one united landmass that's going to fight another. We're going to see potential fighting all over the country or in some hot spots, right? We've already seen that. And so how do we work together across the country to help support each other no matter where we are, and to maximize our impact by doing similar things on similar days at similar time, right? So that's one of the things we want to start moving towards. For folks that don't know me, my name is Lisa Fithian. I've been organizing since the mid-'70s. Most of my work has been on strategic nonviolent direct action. Large part of it is civil disobedience, recognizing that people have power, and that we have to be willing to put our bodies on the line and take on some discomfort, sacrifice, risk in order to change things. I've always been a nonviolent activist. I am someone that has had to sort of rethink my own orientation to nonviolence over the years, because when we enter a moment where we are now, where you have armed militia that have shot and killed people, that are threatening to arm up. More guns have been sold in this country in the past period than Lord knows how many, where people use their cars to drive into people. When I think about what we may face, I say to myself, we are way out of our league. And I've been in conversations where people have never thought about having a gun, or like, should I have a gun? I'm not advocating that. I don't want that. But I think we have to know, and I'm going to talk a little bit in a few minutes about what do we do when guns are in the mix. So, and what I have learned over these years is that when we come up against something that we don't like or we're not comfortable with, instead of like judging and criticizing and shutting things down, we might have to be more open and more willing to be in relationship and agreements with people we might not have ever thought we would be in relationship or agreements with. Right? And that, at the end of the day, is that if we can figure out how we can all stay connected despite our differences, we're going to come out in a much better way. So I want to ask people right now, well, let me just say this too. It's very easy for us to look at all the horror and to get stuck in fear, and to not always see or understand how much things are changed or how powerful we are or what's really underway. And I actually think that we are in one of the deepest transformative periods I have seen in a long time. We understand that within every crisis is an opportunity. Hell, 2020 has been a year crisis, right? From just the fascists, the collapse of the climate, then COVID, Black Lives Matter uprising, and now what we're in. So we've been living in this tremendous state of, I don't know if I have a slideshow. This came to my mind this morning, and it will open up in a minute, but so what did I just write? Well, it doesn't matter. It's chaos is the soup from which change emerges. Let's get cooking. Because we can stand here and get battered by the waves and the chaos, or we can start cooking and getting ready to put in what we need, right, to make sure that soup delivers the nourishment that we need. And again, we have seen throughout this last period what is essential. The COVID pandemic has taught us that we need shelter, and we need food, and we need medical care, and we need some universal wages, and we need sick days. We need all these things. And we have saw during the pandemic how many of these things came to be. We fought for years to get debt relief. All of a sudden there's debt relief. We fought for years for sick days. People were getting sick days. We've been fighting for years for reducing fossil fuels. That happened, and the climate came back. So change is possible. It can happen quickly, right? And I actually think that we see this horror, but we're tipping to a greater place right now. And the foundations of this change, I'm just going to say them, we're going to go back to them later, is that one of the things I'm struggling with is where am I talking versus where am I slideshow, but let me just do this piece, is that well, actually I'm going to hold on that piece. I'm going to hold on this piece. And I want to just take it here for a minute. So everybody's either invite you to be sitting in your chair, feet on the ground, stand up if you'd like, either one. Take a deep breath. Maybe just take another deep breath. Think about all the crap that's driving you crazy. Let that go on an exhalation. Feel that support of the chair under your butt. Feel your feet on the ground. And I want you to just start looking around and noticing the space around you. What color are your walls?
I should have insisted that you put it on VPN.
Do you have any living things in your space?
Good. Okay.
Is there any movement? Maybe turn around and look behind you as far as you can over one shoulder. Breathe. Maybe turn around and look over your other shoulder. Oh, maybe just stretch your neck up. Take another breath. Maybe just take a moment of gratitude for your body. Maybe just thank your body for bringing you here tonight. This process of slowing down and noticing, taking a breath, feeling in to those stuck places, breathing into those stuck places, is all part of techniques to help us stay connected. Because one of the things we need to understand is that the systems that we're living in not only breed but thrive on trauma. We are all living in a traumatized state. The system wants us to be traumatized because when we're traumatized, we react and we fight with each other and we get mean, right? Or we get disconnected or we withdraw, right? All these things start playing out and we're engaging each other without always understanding that we're speaking to and through trauma. And I've come to believe that that is one of the most important pieces of all of our work, and especially now. For us to be effective to deal with what's coming ahead, we have to figure out how to stay connected to ourselves. Because again, I watch myself. I can get up and I can be flying off. Frenetic is the word I call myself. And I have to keep working to bring myself back and reminding myself. So I want to invite you and the people you're with to always think about, how can you always take a few moments for yourself and others to get reconnected, to notice. Because even noticing around you, yes, it's a skill for bringing us back to this moment, but it's also a form of situational awareness in the streets. Our ability to notice what's around us quickly without getting upregulated or overreacting is critical in these times. So I'm going to just pull up this slideshow for a minute. And And Daniel, when I pull up this slideshow, is it going to take up the whole screen? Well, let's just start from the beginning, and I'm going to share my screen. Let me just play from start, and I'm sharing my screen. And share. Okay. Go back. So again, chaos is a soup by which change emerges. Let's get cooking. So, how am I doing this? You are sharing stuff. Share. Personal prep. I think I spelled that wrong. Okay. So I actually think I want to just talk a little bit about going to this period around personal prep. You know, the stuff we talked about already. Just some simple techniques for connecting inside, connecting with others, becoming aware of your environment. But I actually liken this next period to disaster. I think that what we're in is a period of disaster, both human and natural. And there's been disasters for a long time. So one of the things we need to keep learning is how do we deal with disasters? Because they're going to continue. And in any disaster, it usually is after the fact that we think about this stuff, but there's no reason why we should not be getting ahead of this. So when shit's going down, it raises the question, as I said, what is essential? And I think one of the things in this period as we organize is, who are your people? When the shit hits the fan, if it does, and I'm holding a vision that it won't, because we're going to be so powerful and telegraph our power that they're going to know not to do the worst. But who do you want to be with? Where are they? How are you going to connect and communicate with them? What do you need? Where are you going to go? Are your papers in order? You know, when the Hong Kong students were going out in the street, one of the things they did is they wrote letters to the parents, and some of them prepared their wills. What do we think about that? Is anybody else thinking about health proxies, wills, paperwork? I think it's something to think about. Somebody once said to me once you get all that paperwork done, we have nothing left to worry about. Everything's taken care of. And I don't say this because I think that any one of us wants to go out and get killed. I don't want to get killed. Nobody wants to get killed. But being prepared for taking risks is going to be essential. If, you know, it's like, for folks that are black or indigenous or trans, right, just being alive is taking a risk. Just going out, walking out your door is taking a risk. Because folks know they could be killed any day. And they are getting killed. Those of us with white skin privilege, class privilege, we have a very different positionality. We wouldn't have to go in the streets at all if we don't want to. Like, I have this little house upstate New York. I keep thinking, should I just go out in the woods and wait for this all to pass? Let somebody else get out there? But what we know through all of our movement work and the tremendous work that's being done among white people to undo white supremacy is understanding the power that we do have and that we do need to take risks. And we do need to put our bodies out there. It's a lot harder for the white supremacists to shoot a bunch of white people than it is for them to shoot a bunch of young people of color. So these are some of the things you might think about. And this stuff applies to disasters, but it also applies to your street protest. Who are your people? How do you get with them? How are you going to communicate? And we'll talk a little bit later about, Shut Down DC. I'm a big fan. Has been one of the organizations that has been really promoting and organizing people into affinity groups. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But in these times of mass uncertainty and potential mass activity, it's going to be essential that you're with the people that you trust and that you want to run with and that you're prepared together. If people have questions as we go throughout, please put them in the chat, and Daniel will flag me as we go through. So another just simple piece. And let me just say that on this call tonight, this is not a direct action training. This is not a street safety training. This is not a mobile tactics training. All that stuff is necessary. This really is much more about preparing ourselves. How are we going to think about this, and what might we do collectively? Looking at some examples of what some other folks have done. And I also just want to say, I mentioned this earlier, is that there are so many organizations that are doing such good work to protect the vote, defend the vote, count the vote. There's so many trainings. I am thrilled at the high mobilization that's happening, and want to encourage people to do everything they can to try and ensure a Biden landslide. I'm not a supporter of Biden. I want a Biden landslide. I loved Arundhati Roy when she said, vote for the enemy you want to have. I want to organize and get Biden and Kamala Harris accountable to do the right thing. So I really support everybody to do everything they can to get the vote out. But what we're doing tonight is sort of like after that vote comes down, and where are we? There's also, as you know, and Shutdown DC has been doing these, lots of groups that are running scenarios. What are the different things that might happen? And, you know, there are, most of them are things that are going to unfold, and we don't necessarily going to know. But there are some clear situations like overwhelming vote, Trump doesn't concede, right? That is a moment where we should go. Again, we'll talk about that at the end. But back to personal prep, you know, whether disaster or in the streets. Here are just two certain things. There's a lot of stuff online. But I never was a person that I was like, just go in my body. But that's not sufficient anymore. We have to protect our bodies, right? Right now, a bunch of the folks that I work with, we're ordering gas masks. I've never ordered a gas mask, but I'm going to get a gas mask, right? There are basic, you know, like simple things to be smart, like what you wear, bringing layers, good shoes, having a watch, you know. But now, do you have a helmet? Do you have your goggles for pepper spray? Are you going to look for padding or any armor? I know people that are buying Kevlar vests. Now, I'm not, again, saying that everyone should do this, but if you're somebody that feels like you want to be in the streets, you're willing to take some risks, you're willing to go to a front line, it's not a bad idea to have some personal protective gear on. So I would get some stuff. Next thing, again, in disaster world, this stuff shows up a lot. We talk some about this in protest, but not as much, but it's like, what would you call a go bag? Do you have your go bag? Right? So when you're going out to a protest, I always have a little backpack. I always carry my extra battery, water, battery chargers, protein bars, change of clothes. But what if, you know, a bunch of armed militia come into your neighborhood and try and start flushing people out? What if you're in a neighborhood next door? Is it time to get out? Is it time to organize your people to set up watches in your neighborhood? Do you have all these kind of supplies packed up in kits, maybe stashed in another location or in your car? You know, when you're in a state of war, which I believe we're in, again, we didn't cause the war, we didn't ask for this war, it's being waged on us, but many of us are here because we want to fight it, we want something different. But states of war are not just this constant thing. It's very dynamic. Things happen in different places. There's a lot more space than you might realize to actually move about potentially. So this moment offers us another opportunity to think about how do we keep each other safe? Not only do we have what we need, but like, how do we keep each other safe? Are there safe houses in your neighborhood? Are there a team of people that you might organize that would be willing to deploy quickly to other people's houses? Do you have a signal group of your neighbors? Because the thing about war is like, there's usually a ground on which it's being waged. There may be the air war, but there's often a ground war. And so we have to know our ground game as well, and where we can go if we need to get out. So, one of the other powers of an affinity group or working in teams is that you don't necessarily have to have all of this stuff yourself. You can divide up and take responsibility. So this is another piece just in terms of like, how do we take advantage of all the different resources and skills that everybody has and put them together into like what we need. Okay, so I want to talk about live fire for a minute. So I have been in situations with live ammunition in more than one time, along with military concussion grenades, tear gas, all of that stuff. Tear gas, concussion grenades, and all those non-lethal weapons. There's different strategies to deal with all of that, but we don't often talk about live fire. So from my experience, and then also just learning and listening, these are the basic things that I think about. And again, more and more stuff is coming out about this. And I think the Blackout Collective is doing some trainings talking about this stuff as well. So this is not the only place to learn. But the first thing, if you hear gunshot wounds, is to find cover. Get down low, find cover. Is there a car? And in fact, before you even hear live fire, I really urge people, whenever you're out in the streets, no matter where you are, use that situational awareness scan. Where are there cars? Where are things? I mean, I learned this the hard way. I was at a protest in Genoa, Italy, where it was a vicious attack by police. Vicious. They just beat the shit out of people, killed Carlos Giuliani. And it was in that moment when they were coming at us, like I saw a van, and I was like, get under the van. Right? You have to protect where you can't be clubbed or hit or whatever. So finding cover, get low, get behind something. And then pause. Right? Because you want to scan the area. Where is this coming from? What else is happening? Because generally, if there's gunfire, pandemonium can break loose. People can be running. People can be screaming. It can be very destabilizing. And if you don't know where it's coming from, just running around wherever could get you shot. So you want to get yourself safe first, even if that's flat on the ground. Scan what's happening. See if you can identify where the shooter is or shooters. See if you can see where other people are at. And then assess what you're going to do. And again, I want to say to you, friends, well, everything that we can imagine, that we think through in advance of how to do this, the better we're going to be. So once you've assessed where the shooter is and what you think you might do, then it's going to be time to move. Is your move designed to get escape? Is your move designed, do you have to run? Can you run from one cover to another cover, right? You don't want to be running wide out in the open. Look at where you can get from one place to another as quick as possible to more cover. Short sprints. Military folks, teach people to zigzag. Don't run in a straight line. Zigzag. Get down. Pause again. Assess. Now, for most of us, I think we're going to want to escape and get the hell away from the shooter. That's very wise. But there's other of us who are willing to take greater risks, who might try and make a decision to counterattack, to distract, detain, tackle. I'm not advocating people do anything, but I know that when there's a situation like that, the distraction can buy time for other people to get away. So if you get with your affinity group, because I know everyone's going to get an affinity group no matter where you are, because you want to know who your people are and you want to be connected with them when times are bad, you encourage you to talk through. What would you do in that situation? Are you someone that feels like you could work as a team to surround somebody, distract them, tackle them, hit them, disarm them? Or are you out of dodge? And this, on everything that we're doing right now, I feel like it's so important that we understand that there's no right or wrong on any of this stuff. It's like, what can we do? What are we willing to do? So we might think, one of the things as we go later is I think a lot about props for when we're doing actions. And I know that in this period that cars might be really useful props for caravans and other things, but they might also be useful for thinking about if we've got certain areas that we're in, having cars nearby, not only for cover, but for getting out quickly. So we might always plan for how do we get out. So I want to pause for one moment and see if there's any questions that people have about any of this personal prep stuff so far, or live fire, to see if there's any questions before we go into this next section.
Well, Lisa, we did have a few questions come in the chat during that last section. So one was, how do you tell the difference between live fire and other similar noises like fireworks? It's pretty common to hear fireworks at protests or other loud bangs. So that's one question. Another was, what about calling out gun or some other phrase to alert other people to get down? So how do you also alert those around you that there might be a dangerous moment if they're not quite aware of it? So those are two that I saw. People, please feel free to keep on putting questions in the chat, and I'll pass them on to Lisa as we have time.
So just real quickly, if you can see the shooter, I think that's a great idea. You could yell gun, shooter, and point, right? So that people know. Get cover, but point. Over there, right? So yes, that kind of a quick communication could be awesome. In terms of fireworks versus a gun, gunfire is louder than fireworks. And if it's nearby, I don't know how to explain this exactly, but it's like, even with big fireworks, there's kind of that concussion energy. So boom, you can almost feel it. Same with gunfire. And I think they can be very confusing. So, and I don't know, and maybe somebody else has an answer to this too. Please crowdsource on this group. If anybody else has a recommendation, you can put it in the chat. Okay, so there's some live training in there. And we're going to share that. And I say this to everybody. I have everybody's email, so we'll share this chat with resources as well, and I can do a follow-up email to all of you with some of this stuff and some of the slides, and go bag stuff as well. So don't worry if you don't get it all now. But the Socialist Rifle Association, we see, is doing some training on this stuff. And somebody's saying fireworks, you have crackling and whistling. There's usually light as well, whereas gunfire, you don't have any of that stuff. Always wondering gunshots or fireworks. Okay. That would actually be one of the things that I know during the streets recently, a lot of fireworks are going off. Maybe we, as many of us as possible, make a commitment to not be setting off fireworks, right? Because it is so confusing for people. Like that may not be something that's going to really add value to what we're trying to do right now. So, yeah. Any other things? Gunshots have more of a report. Okay, fireworks often sound hollow. Fireworks sounds hollow, snap, so people can see all that. Yeah, and it might, another way to tell, is it one or multiple shots, right? Because again, we're not dealing with people with just simple guns. We're dealing with people with AR, AK-47s, multiple rounds, a lot of shooting. So, yeah. Any other questions? So in all of this stuff, just in general, whenever you're going out in the streets, whenever you're trying to get prepared for all this stuff, it is always important to know your surroundings, have your people, have the supplies you need, know your exit strategy, know where you might be regrouping with people, having some cash in your pocket, all the different things you would be trained, in a direct action training, all that stuff still stands. I think the difference is right now is that again, well, as you know, we don't know what we're going to be facing. So let me, the other thing I just want to say for those of you that are medics, and I know the medics are starting to do this stuff more, is preparing for different kinds of injuries. One of the things that happens a lot is if somebody's shot, the tendency is to go grab them, lift them up, and drag them someplace. That, in fact, can do more damage than just waiting for medics to come to treat them and assess. I know many of you may have known a man named Brad Will who was shot in Oaxaca by a militia. And he died from his gunshot wounds. And a lot of people attribute it to the fact that he was carried out of there, and it just totally messed it up. So gunshot injuries are very different, and we should act with care. Unless you know what you're doing, you probably should not intervene. And I want to encourage everybody to try and get some basic first aid training and to make sure that somebody in your group has basic first aid gear with them, including things like tourniquets at this point. So again, we need to up our game for what's happening. Okay, so that is my personal prep stuff. I'm going to go back to sharing screen and take a step back. Uh-oh. Are you all on?
Yep.
Okay, but is my screen sharing?
No.
No? Okay.
Screen is not sharing now.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, cool. Okay, so, no, stop. Play from here, current slide. Okay, so for some of you that know me, you know that I've been talking a lot about complexity science. And one of the things about complexity science is that it's a whole different framework on how to think differently about what's happening in our world. And I particularly love this because so much of my work has been about creating a social crisis. And I think what we have to understand is that depending on what unfolds, we are going to be in a crisis, but we want it to be one that we are creating. We want to make sure that we are on the offense and not the defense. We want them to be responding to us and us not responding to them. And one of the things, I talked about earlier is that because it is in that place of chaos and crisis when there's uncertainty, that is that place of emergence where something new is going to come through. So I wanted to just share a little bit about how I think this means we think differently in terms of organic living systems. Right now our culture is one that's really rooted in disconnection, and we are trying to build a culture that is rooted in interconnectedness. We're in a culture that thinks linearly, but really what we're working for is the circles that never, no beginning, no end. We have historically lived in silos where we're completely separate, but we're in a period where we're coming together across divides, and it's that alchemy, that magic, the chemistry of when we come together, we can create something new. Complexity is about how the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So what we do individually is one thing, but when we come together, we can create something much greater than all of us combined. This culture typically works on trying to analyze and break things down, where really what we're trying to do is synthesize and put things together and see how they fit. And we're trying to move out of isolation into relational culture. These concepts, these principles, the ones on the right dealing more about complexity science versus that sort of Newtonian worldview of the dominant culture is part of why I am so hopeful about where we're going to come out. Because all of this wisdom is emerging and rooting in how we're working today. And more of it is taking hold. And so I feel like really, I just feel very much more optimistic about what's going to emerge out of this period. The other thing is like these transitions that we're really talking about, because again, yes, we're dealing with this moment, but we're actually really trying to be the shepherds of this massive cultural transformation. And that is a transition moving from a place of control to a place of care. And you can hear the Black Lives Matter uprising movement talking all about care. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. Culture of care, moving from separation to connection. That's why we want to move from individualism to groups, from binaries to multiplicity. It's not an either or, it's an and both. There's not one truth, there's many different viewpoints. We're not all just independent, we are interactive. What I do is going to affect you, what you do can affect me, and this is really critical to remember when we're in the streets. From reducing things to holistic, from moving to single reasons to multiple explanations, from autonomy to relationships, from mechanistic thinking to organic thinking, from definitive answers to imperfect negotiations. I say all this because these, I believe, give us insight into how to start changing our behaviors and also how to start thinking about strategies. We are so, especially those of us that are white, but all of us are so steeped in white supremacy culture that is indicative or embedded in all of these things of control and separation and one truth and reductionism and single reason and autonomy. All of that shit is white supremacist shit. It's what makes us sick. It's not how humans work. And so as we're shedding that, this is where we need to be going, into these other pieces, which are about how change really happens and how humans really work together. So, about a decade ago, there was a massive uprising to overthrow a dictator. Different scenario, but a similar kind of thing was happening, a regime change. Now, we know that this could play out, and there's key dates, the December dates, January dates, Electoral College. But if Biden overwhelmingly wins and Trump doesn't concede, and he's calling out the white, the Proud Boys, etc., will we be able to get our Tunisian moment, our Arab Spring? Can we bring out those numbers? So how do we do that? So the Egyptians, one of the things that they learned, and again, what can we continue to learn from them? And I think about all of this stuff is in this concept of self-organizing. Whenever we rise up, people organize to meet needs. We'll talk a little bit more about the infrastructure that we're building. But one of the things that has happened during the Egyptian uprising that was so important was that the army defended the people against the police. And when you're in a situation of a coup or an insurrection or an uprising, whoever's got the guns often can win, unless our numbers are so highly mobilized. And I don't want to be cynical, friends, but I don't know if I have any faith in the people in this country to do mass uprising of the millions. I want to be proven wrong. Because I think if we were doing that and could do that, Trump would be gone already. So, but the point taken in this moment is we have rogue white militia and we have police forces who have come out endorsing Trump. We have an army that's not supposed to be used on domestic soil, but can be called in. And then there's the National Guard. National Guard in D.C. is deployed by the President of the United States. But in every other state, it's deployed by the governor, unless the president can invoke what's called the Insurrectionary Act. Then he can deploy them. I've been thinking more and more, what would a campaign look like to go to all the Democratic governors and to make a commitment now to refuse to deploy the National Guard against the people, but to only deploy them to protect the people from the white supremacists and the rogue police? That seems a very far out idea in my mind, who've been an anti-military person my whole life. But again, I said earlier, I feel like if there's a full out violent conflict, civil war that breaks out, we're out of our league. A lot of us are not prepared for that. And I would rather pit the people with guns against each other than have us get caught, us, with all the guns facing us. I know that back in the 80s, we were able to get a Democratic governor to refuse to send the National Guard to Central America. I think it's something we should be considering right now. Because a lot of the National Guard are working class people. And if you know people, we should start talking to them. I've been talking to, them when I see them, and the police are locked down. The police may be divided, but they're locked down in a machine in a way that the National Guard may not be. So all that being said and done, we should be thinking and getting ahead of what might get deployed on us and see if we can use it to be deployed on our behalf. The Egyptians also understood that we had to have a common framework. And that's one of the reasons why I'm also a big fan of Shutdown DC, because the community of organizers has been working on a clear framework, looking at the scenarios, doing the recruiting, and helping to craft a vision of what we might do. And so, I just want to share a little bit about what they put forward. Is they made it very clear that they had some demands of the Egyptian people. In this case, it was the downfall of the regime of Hosni Mubarak, cessation of emergency law, freedom, justice, formation of a non-military government with the interest of the Egyptian people, and the constructive administration of all of Egyptians' resources. I don't know if we have clear demands, if there should be a coup. Obviously resign, demand set down, but we should be clear, like, it's got to go. Trump's got to go. In order to achieve what they did, they knew they had to take over important government buildings. They knew they had to try and win over members of the police and army, and they had to protect each other. I feel like we're getting pretty good at learning how to protect each other. I think we don't have a lot of experience taking over government buildings. And we might need to think about that. And I know, as I said earlier, how, we may find ourselves in the streets with people with different tactics than ours. But there may be some people that are willing to break the windows to get into the government buildings. If that's what we need to do, then we shouldn't fight about that. Let's do that. Let's take over the buildings. And maybe we can learn from the youth of Hong Kong. When they broke open the halls of power and went in and took over those spaces, they also did stuff like put signs on the soda machines that said, please don't, buy your soda, we're not thieves. And they put signs on the cultural artifacts in the building that says, please don't destroy this, we honor our history. So they were disciplined in how they took the space. But the point being is that if there are people that are willing to do that, we should support them and not fight against them. The other thing that was really interesting to me as I looked at their model of organizing, they made sure that they chose ground, Tahrir Square. So in your community, what is the heart of your community? Where do people naturally gather? Where are the people of power, right? Is that where you want to make the center of your resistance? Like here in DC, it would be Black Lives Matter Plaza. But where in your community makes sense to organize? And then when you look at that again with the new eyes that you want to put on now, because this training is about helping to get new eyes and new lenses of those areas, escape routes, protective cover, where might you have scouts, right? Where do you have abilities to watch, and that's going to be key, having eyes all the time. But what the folks in Egypt did is they made sure that they had organizing in the neighborhoods. And that it was basically a strike pull, is how I look at it. building relationships with your neighbors, getting them hyped about what's happening on days where we're trying to converge, like whipping them up, some flags, marching people in, right, coming from smaller to larger. So if you were in a city that's a heart, what are the neighborhoods nearest by? What's the demographics of them? Can you organize them? Because part of the trick that we have, friends, is like the more people that start coming, the more people will come. So how do you quickly ramp up your numbers wherever you're going to fight so that more people will come? And again, that's what Shutdown DC is doing right now. And it's another lesson we learned when we shut down Seattle during the World Trade Organization. We trained like 3,000 people in a bunch of affinity groups who had a common vision that knew how to throw it down. And then when other people started to come in, it was very easy to absorb them into the plan, because you had these anchor affinity groups. So that, again, is something to think about. Who are your core people? What's your framework for action? How do you get it anchored with trained people carrying the vision? And then how do you create structures for people just joining in the day to quickly get integrated and absorbed into the mobilization? It might be quick orientations on site, quick trainings on site, quick affinity groups, or forming people into clusters, or what I often call flying squads, which is what you see on this screen here. Gathering a group of 50 to 100 people with energy, moving them to where they need to be. That might be a job of your affinity group, right? Pulling a particular neighborhood into a center of power. Again, preparing yourself. Lots of stuff available online. But again, the principles are, what do you need to protect yourself from chemical weapons, projectiles, batons, horses, backpacks with padding, can be padding for batons, helmets for clubs. So all of these things are not some indicator of your militancy or coolness. These are self-protective measures at this point. So, war has got fighting. I'd like to think that we would have the large enough numbers that just our presence would be sufficient deterrent for stupid or harmful or violent action or repression. And that's what I think we got to keep organizing and mobilizing towards. But there are people who will fight back, who will find a front line. But even more so, what's evolving, there are people, and we see this in New York City. I've been doing a lot of work in New York City. We have had a new group of people emerge that call themselves the People Security. And they have created a lot of armor and shielding and padding and shields and all that stuff. And whenever the police come, they put themselves between the police and the people. And it's interesting because I noticed at one of the protests that we did, people came in that protective gear, and I watched a number of people look at them and get scared and leave the protest because they thought it was maybe an offensive strategy or tactic, when it was really more a protective strategy or tactic. And so again, whether it's arming up or whether it's the wall of moms or the dads with the bullhorns or white anti-racist folks forming perimeters, like, what are the nonviolent ways we can have to create protective barriers between the vast majority of the people and those that are doing harm? And then knowing that if some of the other folks emerge that are going to fight back, that we need to stay out of their way. We might need to figure out in advance how to build some agreements. But again, we are not in a normal time. And if there are people that are willing to put their body between the white militia and a bunch of people that are mobilized, I want to do nothing other than support them, have their back, and be grateful. At the end of the day, I am always and have always been an advocate for the power of the people and to rise up. But we need the numbers. So how do we keep doing that? So also knowing what's coming at us. We have had water cannons in this country, but not a lot. But there's more things that we can look at. What is that? Statistics. Oh yeah, you can also stick right. So this is like disabling vehicles. I am a big advocate of doing no harm, and I don't believe that taking action against property, especially property that's designed to hurt us, is violence. I think it's smart sometimes. I think spray painting cameras that are security cameras trying to track us could be smart. So I think maybe what I'm trying to say in all of this is that in this moment, we should keep our moralizing about some of this stuff more in check. And maybe it's not moralizing, but judgment. And do everything we can to be a united collective resistance, knowing that we might be in different roles in different places at different times, but knowing that everyone is doing the best that they can. The police and people stand together. Well, in that case, the police did not stand with the people. It was the military. So again, what we saw in the Arab Spring and we've seen in many places around the world since then and today is these massive uprisings. And we have seen some stuff in the U.S., right, with the Wisconsin wave right after Tahrir Square, which led to the Occupy movement, massive occupations all across the country, changed the narrative, fought back against the foreclosures. What are the ingredients that allow this to happen? And can we put those in place now? Can we, and we're also dealing with COVID, taking over inside spaces gets harder and harder with COVID, but we might need to do it. And one of the things we've learned is that our movements for justice, not one of them has been a super spreader. Not one. So again, we know, this is Puerto Rico. The people rose up in Puerto Rico and there was a regime change. And they used that moment to start looking at alternative models of governance, including people's assemblies in different neighborhoods. Right? If we can get this, we don't need to worry so much about the other stuff. So Hong Kong taught us a lot about mass uprising, because again, we're not talking about a protest moment. We're not talking about a campaign. We're talking about a dynamic skirmishes that are happening. They brought us the umbrella. We might want to bring that umbrella into the streets for protecting our identities, for protecting against pepper spray, for creating a visual unifying image, right? We got them here. We might think about something like this. The spray painting of the cameras. Knowing that not everybody could be at the front line, developing systems of support to move resources to the front line, which was critical for the front line, but it was also critical because it created a role for people in the uprising, right? People want something to do. They need roles, right? And they want to help. So this was a way to not only support different levels of risks, but to build a community of infrastructure and support to make sure that people had what they needed. In an uprising and loud things, helicopters you may not always be able to hear, right? Developing hand signals. Umbrellas up, helmets on, put your eye mask on, time for face mask, right? Plastic cables, eye wash, pliers, I love that. We need that. Bolt cutters. You might need to take some fences down, friends. But again, jokingly, but we should be thinking a little bit more about how do we communicate if we are to get the large numbers. Are there things that are going to be important for us to be training everybody on? because that is the key part of any uprising or any moment of resistance is like the training in the midst of it. Sorry, I lost my slide. What are the things we might need to communicate, and how do we do it visually? We saw a lot of building of barricades in Hong Kong. You know, I think if people try and build barricades in this country, and we saw this even at Standing Rock, that always became a point of contention, barricades. But barricades can be really smart. They're nonviolent. They buy time and space for people to escape. Because, you know, we have these different things. You have the Arab Spring model, where you had millions of people in one space. Or you have the Hong Kong model, which is be like water and spread constantly. And the barricades were often used, if an action was thrown down, to create a barrier to buy time and space for people to scatter and go to the next place. They worked with a lot of technological tools for like direct democracy and decision making on site about where they would go next. I'm not familiar with all of those. I don't think we're anywhere near using that kind of technology, but it would be simple things like, okay, where do we go next? This neighborhood, this neighborhood, this neighborhood, vote quickly, boom, 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 and the top one goes, so we're going, and they move. So barricades can be key for buying time, protecting people, creating a buffer. Complicated stuff here. This makes me think about also when you're doing your mapping, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Always, you know, permaculture is an area of study that I've learned over the years, and one person's waste is another person's resource, and resources that are local are always best because they're available. So I always look at cities with an eye towards what are the local resources. And I just have to say that construction sites and road work sites offer a tremendous amount of local resources for things that can be like cones can be moved into streets to go from 3-lane to 1-lane. You know, stop signs can be used to shut streets down. You can have a crew of people with hard hats and vests that go around in the morning that basically just rearrange things to shut down traffic in all directions. Things for building stuff. So look for local resources when you begin to start thinking about the terrain you're fighting on. You know, this is an example of when the folks in Hong Kong took over the airports, right? And what they did, again, they used large numbers to sit in and occupy the space and eventually block gates. Are we ready to do that? Is there a scenario that might play out that would cause us to all go and shut down an airport by just sitting in the lobby? So this most recent movement has been teaching us a lot. And what I want to do is we're going to do another breakout. It's going to be short. Daniel, I'm going to have you set us up in random breakouts again. And I want you to talk a little bit about what, if any, lessons you have learned from the Black Lives Matter uprising, because this has been an uprising. This is not just a protest movement. There was an uprising in this country. It is still continuing. But what have you learned from this movement that you think is relevant for what we're facing in this next period? How has this uprising been different than traditional protests? What makes it different? What can we learn? What lessons do we want to bring forward? So Daniel, if you're willing to put people in groups and again, you can do a quick brainstorm if you want, or share stories of what you're learning. And then we'll come back. We're going to share some lessons in the chat. So if there's some key things that you think be good for people to pull, put it in the chat when you come back. So go for it, Daniel.
All right, so you should all be seeing an invitation to your breakout rooms.
Just waiting a moment for everybody to come back. Daniel, we could have played music. That would have been fun, but we'll do that at the close. Great. And let me know when you think we got everybody back.
We have everyone back, all 200 plus.
Great, great. So I want to just take a moment to use the chat for sharing any observations or lessons that people think that they've been learning from this Black Lives Matter uprising. Anything they feel is different about it than a more traditional protest. We got anything to share? Decentralization? Youth-led? Yeah, great. Yeah. Great, great stuff coming in. Great stuff coming in. So yeah, that's some of my thinking about some of the stuff that people have been highlighting. That while it started during the COVID pandemic with the mutual aid groups, I feel like this most recent uprising has done a tremendous job of revitalizing the infrastructures that we need to carry out our resistance. And it's different depending where, but the medical collectives and the legal collectives and the food collectives, right? All providing the bike collectives, the tactical communications, the tactical maps, the Twitter feeds. Like there's tremendous organization that's designed to help support people staying in the streets. I have been working a lot with a group called Abolition Park in New York. And today, one of the notes that came over the thing is like, we have a group that we have a number of unhoused people in our community. And so we provide community meals like 6 nights a week. But the food team, Abolition Eats, put out a thing tonight that we now need a warm team, so that we need a team of people that's making sure that we have blankets and sleeping bags and warm houses for people. And I just really loved the care we take with one another to make sure that everyone has their needs met. No one's hunger, no one's out in the cold. It's interesting because this uprising began during the pandemic, so it was very different. It was easy for the police to give us a lot of space, and I feel like marches became one of the primary tactics. They were all direct action tactics, like nobody's getting permits, and they were shutting a lot of things down and contesting space. But marches by and of themselves don't always make change. So one of the things about this movement as well, like we saw earlier, is like it's a multi-strategy movement. Yes, there's a lot of stuff in the streets, and it's evolving, and it's creative, and we're at the bikers, and there's meditations, and there's, literally stuff every night in New York. In many communities across the country, the resistance continues on weekends, and you have the movement for Black Lives. It's trying to translate all of the policy changes that are needed into a political legislative agenda. And it's interesting to look at movement history, because it was the murder of Michael Brown in 2014 and the uprising in Ferguson that really pushed this conversation to a much more national stage around racism. And then Heather Heyer being murdered in Charlotte, talking about white supremacy. But it was after the uprising in Ferguson that the movement for Black Lives formed, and they put out basically this policy agenda. And now it's been translated into the Breathe Act. And so I'm very optimistic about people understanding that change is going to happen not only by what we're doing in the streets, but knowing that we have to translate it into legislative changes as well, to really codify that change. But we're seeing a lot more work on also just, I think that some of the same problems we have seen for decades in our movements around infighting have continued. But again, I believe that has a lot to do with the trauma, past and present, and the vestiges of white supremacy, and the culture of competition, one-upsmanship, power over. And so I feel like the things Who Keeps Us Safe, We Keep Us Safe is this sort of massive step forward in understanding that we all have responsibility for the group and the community. And taking responsibility for ourselves and others is actually a really significantly healing step. Because we've all been raised in that culture of power over, where we are led to believe that there's somebody else that's smarter than us, that knows more than us, that knows how we should be, that will know how to solve the problem. So we're really trained to just let somebody else do it for us. And when we don't get what we want, we get angry and we blame them and we shame them, right? Without ever taking responsibility for what's happening to our own lives. And that's part of the sickness. That's also one of the reasons why I've been such an advocate for direct action. Because direct action, by its very nature, is about taking responsibility for changing the conditions of your life. So I want to spend a little bit of time going back to, and again, I can't look at all the chat stuff right now, but we'll save the chat since there's so much great stuff and links in here, and send that around to everybody. But I'm going to go back to the slideshow for just a sec. And close that. Come over here. Sorry, friends. Slideshow. Slide. Okay. So, some of you may well have heard this stuff before. I talk a lot about what are the building blocks of change. And when we think about strategies right now, there's these different things: the electoral strategies, policy strategies, regulatory strategies, legal strategies, media, advocacy, education, alternatives, protest, mass action, direct action, and uprising. These are all different strategies that some of us do one or two of them, some of us do all of them, but there's no one way. I spent the bulk of my life working on direct action. And part of the reason I focus on direct action, because direct action is really about exercising our power. And all of this stuff that we're talking about is, in fact, a dance of power. Power and, in their frame, control. Many of us are not interested in the control, but we are interested in being fully alive, being authentic, taking responsibility, and making sure that we can achieve what we need to in our life. So in this realm of direct action, I'm going to scan through most of this because this is not so much what I'm wanting to do on this call, but it's here. It's just like really understanding these dynamics of power, because when we're in the street, we have to really make sure that we are not perpetuating and dividing ourselves and doing more harm. So I just sort of, all right, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to go back to the power stuff. I've done this before. So I want to go back to the trauma piece for a minute and just offer a little teaching tool. Colonization. We're all living in a settler colonial nation that has taught us to be entitled, to waste resources, to work in a scarcity mentality. It's rooted also in this idea of supremacy. There's white supremacy, male supremacy, wealth supremacy, human supremacy. These supremacies are all making us sick. They lead to trauma, death, genocide, right? Nothing good is coming out of any of this stuff. And this is all what we're dealing with and facing in the white supremacists. They are operating from all of these levels of supremacy with no consciousness about the harm that they're doing to themselves and others. So one of the things that I've shared is that our neurology, our nervous system, is one of the pieces of wisdom that's emerging for all of our movements today. And what I want to just offer is that this trauma that is being created, we have historically thought that trauma was an incident that happened. And what we have learned is it's not about the incident, it's about the state of our nervous system and whether or not we can regulate ourselves. Because usually if something has happened and we are not grounded and connected to ourselves, we can easily get into a sense of overwhelm, lack of control or power, and that's when trauma can really set in. When we're overwhelmed, we can't control what's happening around us, and we just shut down or paralyze or dissociate, and that system is getting activated to whether we're going to fight, flee, freeze, right? So there's a lot going on. And what's happened is that we need that system to keep us, dealing with real threats. We want that adrenalized system of fight, flight, and freeze. But what happens is that we often get stuck into these patterns of PTSD. So what the neurologists have learned, the people that have studied this stuff, is that there's basically three sort of states that we can find ourselves in. A kind of a hyper state, upregulated, that manic, crazy, acting out. I go there a lot. There's that hypo-regulated, where we are lethargic, dissociated, staying in bed, right? Depressed. A lot of us live there too. But what we're really all striving for is getting to this place of center. So when you start getting crazy, dysregulated, it's awkward language, but I'm using it for myself because it's helping me become more connected to what's happening in my body. I'm learning to feel that sensation, that discomfort, that something's not right, which is communicating to me now that I'm about to react, and I want to breathe and respond instead of react. So that's part of the work that we're learning to do, is work with our bodies as like this advanced, or when we really tune in, it's like we have our own advanced warning systems. When we feel that stuff starting to go, we know that we could get triggered into an upregulated state or a downregulated state, a fight state, a flight state, a freeze state. So I do a lot to think about what are the things I do to bring myself back to feeling connected and grounded. And so you might think to yourself, what are your strategies for getting back to this good place, this place where you feel calm and connected? And you'll find many of us have similar things: being out in nature, singing, sharing food, being in community, meditating. All of these things help us stay sane. And so these are the kind of things, the meditating, the night singing, right, that we need to start bringing into our group work and our group practices. It's about building that culture of care and belonging, and it's a culture of liberation. Because these states, if I just go over, one of the things that I've begun to see is how these states really can apply to the different types of power and the different notions of supremacy. So power over, again, we talked a lot about, is that oppressive power, that punitive power, that controlling power, that external authority. That power under is where we give up our power. We feel like we don't have any. But what we're really looking at is where we can be with power with each other and within. Because when we're in that center calm space and we're sharing power and we're feeling strong inside that power of spirit, right? That's when we're really fully alive and mature and acting in a good way. Because these states, a lot of these states are states of immaturity and sickness. They're the states of trauma, which is where we tend to live, and ping pong between, where what we really want is to get into the center. And so part of our work is to understand that as human beings, we are biologically wired to be interconnected, to be social animals, to be in community, but we are socialized to be individual, separate, superior, right? So we are all like working from a place of cognitive dissonance. And I don't know about you, but a lot of my life I have been very beat myself up, judging myself, feeling like I'm no good. And I finally began, as I did more and more anti-racism, I began to see that a lot of that stuff was just like manifestations of white supremacy that had kept me immature and reactive. And I began to understand that if I really wanted to, be a strong agent of change, I had to do some healing work. I had to grow up. And when I understood that white supremacy benefited by me continuing to be traumatized, I got really inspired to try and get healthier. And as many of you know, there's a great book. I see some folks on the call tonight from my home community in Austin called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. We've used that book a lot to not only learn about how white supremacy manifests in our bodies, but a lot of somatic group techniques. And so our group does that a lot. And we spend a lot of time talking about what does a culture of care look like? How do we take care of one another? How do we show up? And it's amazingly transformative. And what we have found is that working in these new ways, it feels really good. Like we've begun to understand that when we no longer tolerate or participate or perpetuate in all those manifestations of white supremacy, but instead are acting out of a culture of care and support, it's so liberating. It's like, I can't even explain it, but it's like it's when somebody once said in the group, it's like there's a secret sauce, and part of it is like getting rid of that white supremacist superiority shit, and then we're going to be okay. And it takes some healing to do that. So we need to sort of remember ourselves, remember to stay connected to our body, stay connected to each other, and we're going to be okay. I'm not going to do this a lot. This is my Organizing for Power workshop. You know, oftentimes when I talk about strategy, we need to make sure that we understand what the people we are fighting care about, what we care about. And at the end of the day, we want to make tactical choices where we're costing money, creating disruption, and destroying or tainting the image of the people we're trying to do. So what that means for us is that when we go into this next period of uncertainty, it is going to be in the interests of the vast majority of the people in this country to make sure that Trump is gone. And if Trump has clearly lost and he doesn't go, we need to start looking at strategies that are going to start costing this country money, disrupting the ability of whatever's left of business, and to make it clear that Trump has got to go, and we are no longer going to tolerate what he's putting out. I want to move through some of this stuff more quickly because I don't want to really do this whole power mapping stuff. What I really want to get to is these are some principles of the people power strategy work that was implemented in San Francisco during the 1990 war on Iraq, where about 4,000 people for 4 days shut down the city of San Francisco using an affinity group model that went out every day, all day, and just completely shut down downtown San Francisco. And one of the frameworks that they used is that we need to have a clear why and what logic of what we're doing, right? So if Trump lost and he doesn't go, we have no choice but to shut the city down. We need to make sure that it's broadly publicized what we're going to do. We want to keep training as many people as possible and making sure that people are in some form of organization. And as we saw from the Black Lives Matter, that we want to make sure that it's decentralized. We don't want to have like one head, but we want to have lots of groups moving in relationship to the other groups in common areas, focusing in key locations. So one of the things that we might want to think about as we do this work, well, this is an aside. I'm trying to get to my other slides. I'm lost. But let me just say this. This is some actions we did back in the 90s where we blocked bridges using cars, buses, other vehicles. Because we are in a very dangerous time, I've always loved vehicles and props for occupying space to shut things down. But I think we need to start thinking about those things even more as ways to be protected when we're out in the streets. And so one of the things I want to talk a little bit as we close is just like how do we use car caravans in a whole different way right now. Wow, I feel like I'm missing a part of things, and maybe it's just, let me just look at one. Okay. I just skipped over a bunch of stuff. No, I didn't. Okay. All right. So I'm going to do this. Go back here. Okay. Sorry, friends. Okay. I want to just quickly show a couple examples of models of what have been done before to sort of take space over a period of day or week and to work in like a lot of decentralized ways with a lot of different groups. We shut down downtown DC for a day back in 2008. We had a goal to disrupt business as usual from those promoting and profiting from war. So we might have the goal to disrupt business as usual for those who support an illegitimate president. We scheduled all day long activities. Each group took a different time slot. We coordinated on space. We had a high premium on creativity. We did a map of where the different targets were. There was a game board of the different targets, a self-guided tour of where the different targets are. But essentially what we did, we had a bunch of different groups, and all day long, people were in the streets with bands, banners, Bread Not Publicly, block the IRS, bike blocks. We had bike block barricades. We had banner blocks. We had, there's the leaks. We had fake windmills in the streets. We had banners. We went out into traffic and just blocked cars everywhere. We blocked buses. We trained everybody, block everything. Whatever it is, block it. We coping rolled a bed in. We had the deaf people locked down to lock boxes, blocking intersections. The veterans took over the archives. We had a group that did a March of the Dead that roamed through the city all day, slowly going through intersections to muck stuff up. Grandmothers knitting stump socks, stickers everywhere, students setting up a mass action using a mobile sound system with flash dance parties in intersections, but then also civil disobedience by locking down to desks. So here you had a model of many groups taking different tactics that they wanted to do, scheduling over geographies, over a calendar to impact a small geographic area all day long, right? We might think about something like that. When we did a week of action in New York to create a social crisis, because again, what we're trying to do is create a social crisis, we brought in all the different players, knowing that, not everybody would do the direct action, but we needed everybody at the table because everyone was going to be impacted by these budget cuts. So one of the things we learned, and we'll see when we look at the map in DC, we wanted multiple targets. So when you think about the city, you might think about who has the power to change the current situation, but there is no one person in this thing. We need to impact a lot of people because we never know what is going to move who. So in this stage, we had like 20 different targets that were on our map, and we mapped everybody. That gave us an opportunity to know where to concentrate our forces, right? And you can see, this is New York, this is the Wall Street area. There was a ton of players that we could engage in small geographic areas. So when you're mapping a city, you want to look for everything from the police stations and the hospitals and choke points and bridges and exit ramps, right? You really want to know the terrain, the ground on which you're going to fight. Where do the rich people live? Where are the centers of industry? And then there was a schedule for the week. Now, this is not, I think, what we're going to be looking at all in this period after the election, this kind of model. But I think it's a way to begin to think about that we can actually start setting up a series of days of actions or longer around the key junction points in time with a variety of different targets. I don't want to get stuck here, but each day there was a public action that people could go to, but then there was lots of smaller actions that groups did that were not announced, because we have to make sure that we have the element of surprise on our part as much as possible, and that they don't know where we're going to pop up or who we're going after next to try and move. Again, just mapping examples, gridding examples. This was another example of this mobilization where we had all these assembly sites of different sectors. And when we were ready, we all moved to Wall Street at the same time. So only one march was permitted. All the rest were unpermitted, but they were organized. There was anywhere between 500 to 3,000 people in each march. And just showing up there massively shut down the thing. It wasn't even a plan. We just had to go out and do it. I'm not going to play this. Okay. So I'm going to be moving us soon to the map we've created for DC and some of our thinking about DC. And maybe I should do that first and then come back to this, but it's here, so I'm going to do it. So one of the things in your community, maybe it's your affinity group, maybe you've got an organized structure, but I think it's worth some of you all spending some time to map out places of interest, people you might want to engage. And all you need to do is create a simple spreadsheet. You can do it in a Google Doc, so you can crowdsource it. But you're looking for the type of organization, the name, where their address is, zip code, phone numbers, website, emails, anything you can find on these people. Because all of this, we'll see in a map, but gives you opportunities. So if we have their phone numbers and there's a key person here, like let's say we decide we need to put the pressure on the Democratic National Committee to not have Biden concede, everybody across the country can slam that phone, can call, flood that email box, can take over. Right? So we're looking for opportunities to get to the people we care about. And so we want every means available to us. And then we can map them. This is an example of a map that I didn't name it this way, but we started to do in New York City. All the blue targets are people that contribute to the New York Police Department Foundation. The yellow targets are billionaires. The purple targets are political players, right? So we can begin to see where there are concentrations so we know where to focus our energy. This is another map that we used in Seattle. Another way to think about it. This was the center of power. We didn't have multiple. We had one center of power. And we created a plan by drawing a circle around it to shut it down. And each of these slices was adopted by groups of affinity groups that we then called clusters. And they each had their own plan on how to shut down access to the convention center. And nobody knew what they were doing except their group and their cluster. And so it gave a lot of security to the plan. So we all knew on the morning of N30 that we had people in all these areas and that they would deploy. And then we created 2 public assembly sites where the general public could come because they wanted to be a part of it. And it was in those assembly sites that we could do some briefing and training. And we got them into groups where we then marched them into the area to reinforce the affinity groups that were taking action. So let's say we want to shut down the White House and make sure nobody goes in and out, right? We would need to have map the White House and know every access point, people to support that. So we might say Black Lives Matter Plaza and the African American Museum on the Mall Constitution are 2 public assembly sites, so we can quickly move large numbers into zones of potential conflict. We haven't talked a lot about this, but maybe we should at some point. This is not a time where, we may need to do civil disobedience. The more we can stay out in the street, the better. But if it turns out large numbers of people are starting to get arrested, we might, in fact, start thinking about how do we overwhelm the system from the inside and the out. Again, I think it's going to be more important for us to be on the streets than to be in the jails. But if they do start putting us in the jails, do we start engaging in any jail solidarity tactics inside to really jam them there? I think there's more legal trainings that are happening and more that are happening online and legal resources we can get to. So shut down DC and every other group, I don't give a shit what you call it, but it patterns to what we've talked about all along. Find your people for this next period. Know who you want to go into the street with. If you want to call an affinity group, getting to try and put together a national spokescouncil, there's people that are organizing in their communities that want and build the infrastructure. We use these models not only because they're much more akin to how people work naturally as humans, but it allows us a great deal of flexibility for how we deploy. And honestly, it's the best way to keep yourself safe and to keep yourself prepared. Because when you're with a group of people, everyone's going to be able to help make sure that all the needs are met. So we want to work in those models. We want to make sure that everybody, no matter what kind of org they're in, has a relationship to this. It's this circular model. It's very similar to indigenous ways of being, councils, where everybody's got a spokesperson at the table who can weigh in for your group, and the decisions are made in a council model. So this is happening in advance for Shutdown DC. I know in New York, some groups are using this model. San Francisco Bay Rising uses this model. And one of the things that's nice about it is when we get used to it, we can do it in the streets. So if we're out in the streets and we got a lot of affinity groups and some stuff's getting wonky and we need to change, we can quickly throw up a flag, bring these folks together, make a quick decision, get back to our groups, and redeploy. So I want to really, I can't stress enough the importance of you organizing and getting together with your group of people and looking each other in the eye and saying, yes, we're going to commit to working together as a team till we get to the other side of this. And we're going to support each other and share our resources, and we're going to make our plans, and we're going to be creative, whatever you need to do to build that. I can't stress enough how important that's going to be. And you did a similar thing in Ferguson after Michael Brown was killed. We created this spokes council. And again, you can see these councils. It doesn't just have to be affinity groups. It can be any number of people that are organized for a common purpose can have a seat at the table, because this is not about anyone being in charge. This is about creating the spaces where we can be in relationship with one another for the purposes of coordinating and maximizing our collective action. So for those of us that have been in the street for a long time, I've mentioned already that there are these infrastructure pieces coming together. If you don't have a medical collective or a legal collective or people providing food, in New York there's the People's Bodega, look at yourself and say, am I somebody that can actually help do medical stuff? And can I get with other people and start organizing that? Or am I willing to be a legal support person and jail support person? And who else will do that? So if it's not already organized, start organizing. So that infrastructure piece. The supporters, the storytellers, the scouts, all the different roles that you need. And I think a couple of the other pieces that are coming in these days, again, the wisdom that's coming through, is the importance of understanding that this work, that life is sacred, this work is sacred, that we don't all have the same belief systems, but that at the end of the day, the more we can root ourselves in the sacred and the spirit, and to call on the ancestors, your ancestors, to help support us in this fight. You may or may not believe in any of this, but is there a downside to asking for all the support we can in this time? I believe they're with us, and they're in that arc towards justice. And so I welcome them as allies. I welcome all the living beings as allies. But, at the end of the day, even if it's just like a kiss, a hug, and a prayer, and you make that connection, that's a sacred link. You look each other in the eye, that's a sacred link. That's what we're looking for, because that's going to keep us safer and stronger when we're out in the streets. Let's not forget the children, and we have a lot of parents and families that might need support with their children. Maybe your group is going to become a child care collective to make sure that other people can be in the streets, right? Or cooking the food, transportation, all of this stuff. We can't do this resistance work. We can't do a sustained occupation without this stuff. Do you have a good bike resources in your community, right? It's not just city bikes that you have to pay for, right? Because the bikes are now not only ways to get from one place to another. At least in New York, we have these tremendous bikers who every march are at the front and the back and the side, holding the traffic, making space. And we may need some of that as well. And we certainly need bikers that can be our scouts, that can be eyeballing stuff for us as we go through. And the last thing I want to do is just show a couple quick pictures around that. There was an image in here in Prague when we were organizing against the World Bank, and there were 3 different tactical groups. There was the blue group that I called the Smashy Smashy group that was willing to fight. There was the yellow group, which was the Tutti Bianchi group, should have their damn pictures. Their pictures are going to show up in here. That was in offensive nonviolence, and they had these great stuff, and they pushed. And then there was the tactical frivolity group. And the thing is, so these are some of the crazy pictures. I'll get to them. This is the insurrectionary. This is the clown army, the superheroes, the knitters in intersections, the blockaders using props, beds in intersections. Props are great visuals. This was that. Actually, I'm talking about these 3 different groups trying to get to this convention center. This is the tutti bianchi, the shields with the banners and these things, so that when the police were banging, they were hitting the inner tubes and looking silly. This protected people from water cannons and pepper spray as well. The balloons in netting, also blockades against the police. Police are pretty silly beating up balloons. But this was the tactical frivolity group, the pink and silver group, that dressed crazy and moved weird. And the police were so freaked out. There's literally scenes of them backing up because they don't know how to deal with these folks. And it was the pink and silver group that actually got to the convention center. I say all of this is because it's like, we don't ever want to give up our creativity and our beauty and our willingness to like be wild and bold and proud and loud and all that stuff, right? That is part of our armoring ourselves with love and beauty, right? Our joy is our resistance. So we want to be able to go in the streets full of life because, again, this is a contest of power. And the people that are sitting on the sidelines are going to try and figure out, am I going out? And if I'm going out, who am I going out with, right? We want people to come and join us. So we don't maybe necessarily need to be totally crazy like these people in pink, right? Because we don't want to alienate our people. But we want to be inviting and bringing people in and keeping beauty out there so that if the shit is going down, there's a very clear picture of who we are and who they are. Because this is a battle. And we want to make sure that the vast majority of people join us. I'm just going to show a couple pictures of this. This was a strategy in Germany of taking over space. If you're in a rural community, this might be more useful to you. But the principles behind it, I think, are also useful in this period, especially if we are in a greater context where we're trying to take space. But it's how do we move from one big march into multiple marches and multiple streams. This is designed to like get through police lines to take over a road. And you can see these large groups of people that were mobilized, willing to take down fences. If we have to take down the fences, folks, it's okay. We're going to be able to do that this time. It's okay. It's, it's at the end of the day, we need to do that, we should do that. But this many folks got on the road. And the way they did it is they focused on not the police, but the spaces in between the police. So we say we need to get someplace, like we want to move with intention quickly and overwhelm whatever the block is. And it's like always looking what is open and not what is closed. So part of our training in the streets is looking for those openings, being focused with intention, and going quickly. So it's real important that you are all prepared and you know what you want to do. When you are in the streets and the shit's hitting the fan, we are not going to have a lot of time for like, oh, well, let's do this, or how about that, right? Or blah, blah, blah. Sometimes we're going to have to move very quickly and make decisions quickly. So the more you can think through and know what you want to do, the better. So as we come into this next period, this was done during the Sudetenfight. We began to look, if we put these blockades in these places, we could have huge impact, a rail blockade in 2020. That may still need to happen. So I want to switch over, Daniel. I'm going to escape out of this, and I want to pull up the DC map. Did I do the stop sharing?
Yep, you did. Do you want me to pull it up for you?
Yeah,
I have it.
That would be great.
All right.
And my friend Patrick is also on this call. And he may jump in on this stuff because he actually did the mapping. I do a lot of my mapping in Google Maps because it's super simple and I'm a simple girl. But this is a much more sophisticated, but I think maybe easier platform. But there's a number of different things up there. So we began to put together a list of things we want to know about in the city. So where are all the police stations? Because it's good to know where the police are. Where are all the key government buildings? Where are all the media outlets? Who are the Trump boosters? We don't have all of them up there because we wanted to keep this simple for you. Go ahead, Patrick. And Patrick, do you want to just pick up and talk a little bit about this map?
Sure. I wasn't planning on that, but
Well, I mentioned it earlier, but yeah, go for
yeah, yeah, happy to. So, Lisa and some other folks came up with a great list of the folks that we might want to go have conversations with, and we have them in categories, right? So we may decide that we want to go talk to the media. So where are they? We may decide we need to talk with Trump boosters. So where are they? And we used software called ArcGIS. If you have a university affiliation or somebody in your group does, you can probably get this for free. Otherwise, you can get it for not very much. But what's cool about this is we're able to pull in other properties in DC. And then the nice folks from the District of Columbia city government have made available transportation infrastructure maps and all sorts of other things. When we zoom a little bit closer, we can take a look at here's a version of it where in the we're seeing live traffic here, and then where there are road closures, it'll tell us whether there's a planned event or there's something else that's going on. So this is a good thing to have to look at home when you're to have somebody in your affinity group looking at home. And we did during Juneteenth we had a version of that where people were tracking things live and helping us in this. Even further in, we've got super high resolution. This is once again a courtesy of the District of Columbia, super high resolution, better than Google Maps, aerial photography of Washington D.C. So where it's not loading very fast because we're on Zoom. We can get really detailed. Okay, exactly how wide is that intersection? Information. So it's a wealth of information. I imagine folks are asking what the link to it is. We're still working on it. It's gonna make it. We're gonna make it public. At some point. I think that there's a little bit too much going on here for it to make sense. In general, the source of the aerial data is the DC open data. So most cities have open data programs where they make big sets of data available to basically anybody who wants to access it. And we're able to just kind of pull this in here and add the add these as layers to our map. So much of this information is provided to us by the local or the district or the federal government, and we're happy to take it.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. And will you scroll out a little bit so we see a bigger view? So this is actually looking at like a very sophisticated map, and you might look at this and say, oh my God, that's way too much for us. You can go a little bit closer. But part of what we are still working on, and I'm just going to sort of put out ideas, because again, I think this is stuff for you to start thinking about in your own community, is, if, and people were like, if X, then Y. So for example, one scenario could be on election night that Biden has an overwhelming victory in the vote, but Trump refuses to concede. We believe that that is a moment that could trigger significant social disruption until he concedes, right? So for us, that might mean looking at blocking the bridges and main thoroughfares coming into the city to kind of shut the city down. And so you might look at your city. What are the primary access points? What bridges, rivers, roads are the main ones? Which ones are coming from industry sectors? Where the rich people live? And begin to think about how might you shut this down. So in DC, for example, now I can't move this map because I'm not in it, but you can see the borders of DC. And as you go around, Patrick, can you show me the northwest side a little bit more? Like there are main thoroughfares from the west side, like Wisconsin Avenue, Mass Avenue, 16th Street, Connecticut. All of those are major thoroughfares that if a group was to occupy a space and shut that down for a while, it could have tremendous impact of backing things up. So shutting a city down, knowing how you might do that and where you might do that could be a great plan for what we do should there be a Biden victory and Trump doesn't concede. If, let's say there's a narrow Trump victory, we might have to pivot, and at that point we might need to say, we need to target the Democrats and make sure Biden does not concede, right? So who might all the Democratic, so in DC, this is a target-rich city, but who are all the Democratic leaders, players in your city that you would want to engage if that was the scenario? Or maybe it's a narrow Biden victory and Trump is not conceding. Maybe it's targeting Republicans and telling them it's time to get him to go, right? So we're thinking through the different scenarios and what might be the appropriate targets and then actions based on that so that people can start organizing and getting ahead of it. Now, we don't have a lot of time left, so I know this may seem like a lot. And right now, like DC and New York, which are cities I'm looking at, are pretty big cities. But the more quickly you can begin to figure out your terrain, where are the opportunities for engagement, and the phone numbers and the emails, etc., then if people are organized in affinity groups and you actually can use a council model, you can begin to divide up that turf. Let's say we want to go after the White House. Right, we've been talking about doing an advance protest, maybe to make noise, to get, because some of you may be too young to remember that back in the 80s, the U.S. ousted Noriega from Panama, and one of the things they did is they surrounded the presidential compound, with giant speakers and played music nonstop for 24 hours all day for a long time. Like, could we do that with stuff? So we're talking about what would it take to surround the White House and have people do stuff. We can divide it up easily with affinity groups. So I want to encourage people to think about who's got the power in your community, map the power, map the opportunities, then look at it strategically and begin thinking about who you would want to engage based on the scenario that's happening. Is that making sense to people? Does that make sense? And then the last thing I want to say about that is that maybe through the Disruption Project Spokes Council or other places, I'm not sure how it's all going to come together, is coordinating beyond that. So let's say another scenario is narrow Biden, but we need to get all the votes counted. We need to slow things down. Some of us were talking about maybe we should be organizing car caravans. We had a lot of experience with that during COVID, the height of it. Being in a car is safer than being your body right out of space. We could take those car caravans out on some of the main highways. So from New York to Florida, in all the cities around Route 95, we could all shut down 95 highway on the same day, the same morning, with car caravans going slow in every lane. If you look out across the country, the highways that go across, we can think about there are certain urban sectors, industrial sectors that might make sense to shut those roads down around. There's another website that we're looking at that maps critical infrastructure. So again, I think to myself, if we're in a coup situation and we're under attack and under fire, how do we, in the safest way possible, start chipping away at the systems and infrastructure they need to maintain power? And a lot of this stuff, I mean, again, we don't think about this stuff because this is not really what we think about doing. But it's like we might have to like take over a TV station, right? Maybe we're taking over the local TV station and getting airtime to put out a call for people to come join us. I know that sounds crazy. I've always wanted to do it though. Or, so I want us to think beyond our imagination. In New York, there's a map in New York of infrastructure. It turns out there's 3 antennae that control all the telecommunications. I want nothing to do with that really, but it's like, what kind of communication systems do we have versus what do they have? So all that being said and done, I'm really a big advocate of getting ahead of it, getting ourselves organized, getting all of the resources that we need, knowing what we might do so that we can roll it out and do. We don't have to like go slow. We can just deploy. So I'm going to move towards opening up for questions or discussion. I want to put together a document that will mail you not only with the chat, but with the slideshow, but also all the other resources of the groups doing training and other resources on everything from live fire to mapping, stuff like that. We are happy to talk, have individual conversations with you in your city if you're trying to put some stuff together. Shutdown DC website has got some just tremendous, impressive organizing resources, frameworks that you could use as a template for your own community. So yeah, why don't we just pause and get questions, and then I guess the last thing is that as we create these potential frameworks, we'll send them out to people too and figure if we can all get on the same page for the same stuff. Okay, so let's see what kind of questions are coming in, comments. And Daniel, if you see any that have been coming up.
Yeah, so one question that's come up a few times has been around how do you balance secrecy and transparency? At one point, there's a discussion going on around how do we communicate with each other through Signal or VPNs. I think that might be a pertinent question of, we're talking about some pretty intense things. How do we open up the doors to everyone, but also keep each other safe?
That's great. That's a great question, and I'm a fan of Shutdown DC. You can probably tell that. But one of the things I like about Shutdown DC, I consider it kind of like an open organizing model, and I think we need more open organizing models, meaning we put it out broad, we invite everybody in, we have basic levels of some security, but it's pretty open. But as you get closer into the details of stuff, it becomes more secure. And it's within your affinity groups, which are really the best place to build our security. So your affinity group can make decisions about what you do, when you do, and you don't have to tell anybody else the details of it. So one thing I always talk about in terms of security and security culture is if you're going to do something that's super high risk, don't talk to anybody about it. Don't put it on the phone. Don't put it on the emails. Don't put it in the text. It's face-to-face. You do it. You don't have to tell anybody. Don't. Because we don't know who anybody is. But if it's not that super high-risk consequence, understand that when we say we're going to go do something, like we're going to shut that down, we are setting in motion a chain of reaction where the state then begins to embolden itself and shut itself down. Again, that's what we saw in Seattle as well, right? So we have to understand that we are trying to get them to do certain things, and whether we shut it down or they shut it down, it doesn't matter as long as it's shut down, right? So I think that we need to be clearer publicly about what we're doing, and we need to be very secure among ourselves for stuff that is super high risk of personal consequence. Also, just don't ever talk about what other people's actions are. And then if anybody else has tips on that, please feel free to put it in the... and yes, Signal group, I've been using Signal a lot. I think it's a pretty good tool for communications on the street. There may be other secure stuff, and VPNs do protect your computer. I'm not an expert on that computer security, but I know that there are other people, and we might be able to share resources on that stuff. But be careful what you post on Facebook too, any social media. And in fact, when you're documenting stuff, as we all know, we're learning, we're not putting faces in, and we're not putting in anything of people doing stuff that could get them in trouble, right? That's how we keep each other safe. We don't expose other people in our movement. Digital security stuff kind of walking and biking, caravanning to DC on November 3rd. Yeah, Margaret, I love that idea. I actually, honestly, friends, if we're looking at a coup or insurrection, I mean, if we could get even 10,000 people around the White House to hold it down in an ongoing way, it could be amazing. 50,000, 100,000, a million, game over if we could do that. But since we're not going to do that, maybe we're doing that at a different scale all around the country in places that matter. But yeah, I mean, and Shutdown DC is not immediately putting out a call for everybody to come, but they are definitely trying to mobilize heavy duty in the DC area and the region. Jitsi, I see. Jitsi is another platform other than Zoom that is more secure. Zoom is the big critique of Zoom because they have worked with police in the past and provided information, and we don't want that. We want to abolish the police. I see Who's Seen the Messiah on Netflix. I haven't seen that. But Netflix also has lots of other great documentaries, including stuff around the Hong Kong uprising. Dealing with threats, just put in the document. Great. That on the Disruption Project, there's a Dealing with Threats link. Any tips for choosing targets in small towns? In small towns, I think, well, a couple things. What is the heart of the community? Where do people go and gather that has special residence? Where are the people in power? Right? Is there the commons, what might be considered the commons near the people in power that makes sense as the gathering grounds? Small towns are actually much easier to shut down than big towns, but tactically it may be harder, right? So it might be that you're not doing blockades as much as you are doing circles of holding space, vigils in key intersections. Because I think it's harder to take more serious risks in small towns. So I would say trust yourself and trust the people to know your community. But in everything you do, continually ask yourself, can I go further than I am now? Is there a bigger risk I'm willing to take? What are the consequences of that? How do I best prepare myself to assume the consequences of that risk? Do people you guys metro, carpool, bike, safest way for transportation? I'd say all of it. Right now, people can get around. That could get shut down. But that was actually another thing. When we were in Ferguson organizing, that was actually one of the things that we ultimately had to do is that we knew that when the non-indictment was going to come out, they could very easily shut the city down. So we really organized people into affinity groups by where they lived, because we knew people might not be able to get from one area of the city to another area of the city. So you should be prepared for parts of your city to not be passable, right? So you might think about, what is the zone of conflict? What's the next zone around that, which might be escape and protection? And what's the next zone around that where you're just like completely out of play, right? So like thinking about how far are you away from the conflict? And do you have safe houses? If you're a well-known person in your community that's been organizing, a front person, the white supremacists got your number, right? And you're feeling at risk. Do you know where you're going to go? Are there safe houses, right, that aren't your family? Because we know they research us too. In New York, again with the Community Abolition Park, we have a bunch of safe houses. So when the police come out and the shit hits the fan, people know where they can go. Oh, the anarchist jurisdictions? Well, those anarchist jurisdictions, those are some of the hot spots, right? I don't know what the suggestions are we're looking for. I mean, I said at the beginning of the training, I know this is perverse, but I just have this hit that we should be trying to get the governors and the mayors that are progressive to come out publicly about the National Guard will be used to protect the people from the police and the white supremacists. And not allowing Trump to deploy them into other people's cities. So keep organizing. In those cities that have been doing it, keep it up. Keep going, because you inspire us. And Portland has inspired all of us. Seattle, you guys started the first occupation on the ground. Shit's happening. Philadelphia, they've won 50 homes. They've just won more. Like, amazing things are happening. I don't know if you all are following all the things that we're actually winning, but yeah. Demos, government. I'm trying to scan this. Operation Relentless Pursuit, Legend Cities. I don't know. Operation Relentless Pursuit, Legend Cities. I don't know about that. You can't hack a piece of paper. Don't, just in terms of security, don't put it on paper. There have been times where we might be talking about an action where we don't know if it's fully secure or if people might be listening. So you might want to move also cell phones. We had a code of language where, like, honeybee meant scout, and we just made up language for the different things, and we would just use the code. We could all see it, so that when we were talking, we were using the code language for what we were talking about. So just be creative in how you think about talking about stuff. Daniel, are you seeing any other questions that are important that are jumping out?
One question from a bit earlier that had some lively discussion was when you were talking about trauma.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about fight, flight, freeze, and then that fourth F of fawn. And there are a few questions about how that fourth one of fawning might present itself in movement spaces. So I'm just curious if you had anything to speak to that, since it seemed to generate a lively discussion in the chat.
And fawning, I don't know that I can add a lot to that. I'm not sure. Fawning, like pretending to, like, be dead? But I'm not sure I know what it means, so I don't know. Maybe people in the chat can illuminate it more or be clear with me. So Daniel, maybe you can get that clearer, but meanwhile, yes, you can use disguises. You can dye your hair. You can wear different things. That's one reason why masks are great right now, but also creativity. So disguises is another good way. Keeping a change of clothes in your backpack, so that if you're wearing a white shirt and things get crazy, you can all of a sudden put on a blue sweatshirt. So having that kind of stuff on hand is great. Frustrating to fawning. I don't know. When I see that right now, as in hero worship, I really don't know much to say about that, but it makes me think of the clowns, the counterinsurgency revolutionary clown army that played with the cops. So, like, when they had the water cannons and we had the water guns, or using feather dusters on their thing. I don't know about fawning is prostrating yourself to authority or power. I don't know. I don't want to do that. You can, though. So I'm sorry. I don't have more to say on that. Another thing, I know DC did this, but we've done this over many years in different mass mobilizations. It's another proactive strategy, which is to get a community delegation together to set up what sort of terms of engagement, and to try and get the police to commit in advance to not using any chemical weapons in our communities, not using non-lethal projectiles, no live ammunition. Like, we could set the terms of saying, we want you to commit to this, and when they don't, then you can make that a media thing to expose that they are not. There's no commitment to stop using chemical weapons in neighborhoods, right? So, like, how do we always stay on the offensive so that they're reacting to us on things that are going to matter to us? So I know DC just organized to try and get a big thing to stop them from using all those tear gas stuff. I'm loving my education right now on this fawn-like stuff. So this is good. This is a new one for me. So I don't know. There is a lot of traffic in there, but I'm not. For me, what's having resonance is that we need to be clear, we need to be strong, we need to be unwavering, we need to not be fawning, we not to appeasing, we need to be very clear. No more. This is not going to pass. You're out. We're not going home until he's out, in whatever way that might take. And to know that this could be the long game. We could be talking about through January as well, depending on what happens. So how do we also keep ourselves nourished and sustained in this next 2 to 3 months? We can do tag teams, we can do sharing, taking different days of action. That's another good way to have different days of actions. Okay. Yeah. The phone sitting in your affinity group to develop a plan to address those risk giving into something. Yeah. Somebody else has also put up walkie-talkies, ham radios, flags. There's many different ways to communicate. You could have all your people on a conference call live. Sometimes it's really good in your group to have one person's job it is to just be the tactical communicator that's like getting the information and then relaying it to your group. And again, tactical information. Right now, I've seen people using Signal, but also using Twitter, also using Telegram. People who are reporting regularly on the police movement so that we're getting live information all the time is awesome. So you might want to get a comms team together. How do you deal with fear and trauma when you're on the... So how do you deal with fear and trauma when you're on the front line? I think each and every one of us has to make our own determination about what we can take and how much we're willing to take. Being on the front line is scary. It's easy when you can tap into what you love, what you care about, but also that righteous anger, right? Because anger is a powerful force, and we can both we can be angry and still be very strategic and non-reactive. We can be I don't want to say this. So we can be afraid and act with courage despite that. We can hold our ground despite the anger and emotions and fear that might be running through us. The ways that we do that is we have somebody next to us here and somebody next to us here, and we're linked up together, or we're holding hands. And when you're scared, you squeeze them a little tighter, right? Or you say to them, I'm afraid, I need to know that you're with me. And you might look them in the eye and just know that you've got each other. And if you're near somebody that's afraid, you can help them. You can lend them your courage. You can lend them your nervous system. You can say, can I put my hand on your back right now? We've got you. I've got you. We're together in this, right? We have got to love and support one another. We've got to help bolster each other. Nope, we don't want to do this. But if we don't show up and do what needs to be done, we all know, I don't need to go there, we all know that none of us can take 4 more years of this, and we know that Canada can't take all of us, right? So this is that moment where we are entering the chaos, we are entering the crisis, but we're organizing with our structures of affinity groups, we're organizing our infrastructure support, we're working with each other in a way that's anti-oppressive, that's like being accountable and responsible, right? We're putting all of this into place. We're being strategic on the ground, right? This is the new world. This is what is going to come through on the other side, right? So just like during COVID, I've talked to you all about keep those mutual aid groups going because people were hungry before COVID. As we keep these going, they are creating the new world for us. So this is what we're doing now. We are building that foundation and that culture in every way that we do this. And so we just got to love and support one another. I mean, that's really, we are all we got. Oh, strikes. Yes, I love strikes too. I would love to see a massive strike if we could do that. But this is the thing, friends, we need to remember. When Al Gore lost that election and there was a dispute in Florida, the labor movements were poised to move. And what happened? The Democratic Party stopped them. We were all ready to go to Florida for those hanging chads, but the Dems stopped the labor movement. Labor movements generally will not go on a general strike if they're under contract because it's a violation of their contract. So one of the things we've been talking about for folks in labor, right, because if labor was to call a general strike, it'd be awesome. But what will it take to do that? It might take the Dems to tell the labor unions to do a general strike. And when we think about that, then we realize that may never happen. But I hold the vision that the impossible is happening and can happen. And a lot of it always is planting ideas. So if you know anybody in a labor union, start putting the idea out. Because wildcat strikes could happen as well. We saw that early in COVID when people were being forced into conditions that were unsafe, people took action. We're going to be in that similar point, right? So everybody, anybody you know, wherever they are, start planning the ideas. Are you willing to not go to work that whole week, 2 weeks, a month? Right? So we have to think about that. And yeah, I think if we could do a general strike, that would be fantastic. We should do it. Okay. Any other things? I know I'm just catching stuff randomly. I know a lot of us haven't been to work in March in a long time. That's right. That's great. More forces for the street. They're Rochester. Oh, the Rochester AFL is calling for general strike. Awesome. So right when we can start sharing that, if Rochester can do it, your community can. So again, in your organizing, take a moment to think back who locally has got the power, whether it's the Dems or the Republicans, and when do we engage them in advance? How do we pressure them? Because what we do know, if we as grassroots people are able to turn out large numbers, then those institutions that are more afraid are going to start turning out more numbers. So this is a numbers game right now. And who's going to blink? And one of the things about strikes and labor organizing, and it's, I think, appropriate for this moment, we have to stay out there one day longer than they do. We have to stay there longer than they do. Bottom up, yes, school strike. Okay, cool. Any other key things? Questions? That you're seeing anything, Daniel? General walkout, great. I don't give a shit. We don't need to get started in language. Just we're going to withdraw. Let's just say it this way. In the realm of nonviolence is this idea of cooperation and non-cooperation. The system continues because we cooperate. We take our power back by non-cooperating. So if we can look at massive non-cooperation across this country, whether it be not working, not participating in whatever they want us to participate, that's where we're going to have a lot of power. And if we can do that mass non-cooperation to cost them money, like I keep thinking about, like even like the warehouse areas where things get distributed, like shutting down all the warehouses that distribute stuff so that they don't get their supplies.
Well, so maybe one last question. That's a really good question someone asked a few minutes ago. What's one thing you think we should all do after getting off this call? I've had several hours of amazing training. What should we all do now?
Make a commitment to find 5, 6 or more people that you're going to buddy up with and make a team. And then in that group, start talking about your personal preparation, put in your go bags, where do you want to have your bodies when this shit goes down? How are you now networking and connecting to other groups? Right? I think in this moment, that's the most important work because it's those small groups and then linking up to others that's going to be the best way for us to stay safe and to actually deploy in strategic ways. Right? Once we build the structure, then we can utilize that structure. But if we're all acting as individual agents or 1 or 2 people, it's really hard. We might swarm as a mass, but that's great for the swarm if that's what we're trying to. But if we're trying to do more sophisticated actions of shutting stuff down, it's too much. Right? We need organization and people that can help lead actions or anchor actions or take groups to where they need to be. So we need to recruit more and more people, organize our people, start preparing ourselves. Because this is the other thing we know. When you're afraid or dysregulated, one of the best strategies for anything is to do something. When you do anything, is you're actually in your agency and you're making decisions and you're in your power. So our goal is to stay in a place of our power and not in a place of trauma and reaction. And right? So that's the best thing we can all do is shore up ourselves, get what we need, know we're prepared so we have the confidence of that. We have the confidence that we know we got our people, right? And then organize in that network to make sure that you have a collective vision for what's going to happen in your community, city, town, right? Because once you have a vision and you all agree on it, it's like you're setting that structure foundation down, and then people know how to plug in. Yeah. And maybe we'll come out on the other side with a lot more unions. Action is the antidote for despair. Joan Baez, yes. So, well, friends, I'm really grateful for you all coming out tonight. I came into tonight pretty stressed out because I couldn't get my slideshow synced up to my written words and whatever. So I didn't have everything together that I wanted to tonight. But I appreciate your patience and your participation. And one of the things that I know is that we don't have all the answers. We don't know all of what's going to be ahead. We don't always know what the right thing to do is. But we can trust ourselves that we're doing the best that we can, that if we can take the time to breathe, become alive, connect, feel that love for one another, that is an unstoppable force. And it's our greatest protection. I like to armor myself up with love. That's my greatest protection. And get with other people organizing, and let's go shut some shit down. I do have a book. I know that some of you know that book and have bought it and read it. I'm grateful to you. That has a bunch of stuff in it. But we don't have time to read that shit right now. So don't worry about that book. Get your people. Know where you want to be. Get your go bags. Get all that stuff together. Know what you want to do. Assess your risks. And, be prepared to be in the streets. And here in D.C., we're urging people to vote and come to Black Lives Matter Plaza. I think that's a great formula for any city. And we're going to try and project the results so people can watch it. So the most important thing that November 3rd is to not be alone, but to get with as many like-minded spirits as possible, because it's in that moment we're going to see, and then we're going to start to know. And if Biden overwhelming vote and Trump doesn't concede, get ready to shut your city down on the 4th or the 5th. And then we keep rolling from there. I think a lot of groups are calling for marches on the 7th, right? And then maybe out of that we can recruit to do more stuff as well. So, and we're happy to share with you sort of the scenarios we're thinking about, if X then Y, if that will help you in your community. So I'm going to wrap this up early. And thanks for putting my website in, my book Shut It Down, also a website. We're going to share this track. And maybe what we can do for just closing, well, one, everybody can put their visuals on if they want to and take their mics off. If you want, give yourself a little hug and squeeze. Appreciate yourself for showing up here tonight, taking some time out. It's good for us. And we're going to all say, I'm going to open up, we're all going to say one word of how we're feeling, and then I'm going to blow you all a kiss goodbye, and if you want to blow anybody else a kiss, you can do that too. And I look forward to seeing you in the streets. Yes, can you unmute everybody, Daniel? And look for a document from me in a couple of days. I'm actually on my way to Nashville, Tennessee to see if we can fuck up Trump's debate by hopefully have to see us and get him a little whacked before he goes to debate. I'm on my way there now, so wish me luck. And I'll tell you another thing we just did. This was at the White House. It felt very childish, but I loved it. We used black tape and we taped the entire fence and taped down all the images that are on this wall that people put up so that nobody can go and see the White House to take a photo of it. Those of you in DC, you go check it out. It's really, I thought this is so mature, but it felt so good. And also, it's like, you don't deserve any attention.